Good evening, everybody. Good evening. And thank you very much for your patience, and thank you to members of the public for your patience. We had some things we needed to discuss before our meeting could start. My name's Councillor Helen Green, and I would like to welcome members of the public, colleagues and officers to this meeting. I'm chairing tonight's meeting, and to manage the business as efficiently as possible, I invite people to speak one at a time to ensure their contributions are properly heard. Therefore, please don't speak unless you're invited to by me, and I thank you in advance for your assistance. The fire evacuation procedure: on hearing the fire alarm, please leave the building immediately using the nearest available exits. Do not under any circumstances use the lift. The assembly point is in the area of the Civic Office car park next to the roundabout. You should not attempt to re-enter the building till you know it's safe to do so. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off or on silent. Members of the committee, visiting members and members of the public, please be aware that our planning committee meetings are always webcast live, and any contribution you make will be broadcast. Please remember to use your microphone when speaking and to turn it off when you've finished. This is very important for the webcast because the camera will move to the next speaker. You need only press the black button once each time to turn on and off. Item 1 is membership, and Councillor Richards is substituted for Councillor Handley, and Councillor Giorgio is substituted for Councillor Smith. Item 2, communication and apologies. Members, where a roll call or recorded vote is requested, we will do this with the general members first, then members representing the ward the application is located in, and I vote last and exercise a casting vote if required. Visiting members, thank you for being present. Make sure you alert the chair when leaving and re-entering the meeting, so a note can be made for the records. Officers have tabled papers detailing additional information that have been received in relation to the application to be considered. Copies have been circulated to members and made available to members of the public. Do all committee members have a copy? And I have apologies from the absence from Councillor Handley and also Councillor Smith. Item 3 of the agenda is declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in connection with this evening's agenda? No. Item 4 are the minutes. The minutes of the meeting held on 23rd January are included in the papers. Can these minutes be confirmed as a true record and signed after the meeting? Thank you. Item 5, planning application. As the papers for this meeting are published and provided to members of the committee 5 working days in advance, and a meeting to enable members to clarify technical points has been held, I will proceed on the basis that members are well informed about the application before us, having received and read the report. For each application, it's custom and practice at Hertsmere for one member of the public to be permitted to speak against the application and one to speak in support. Councillors who are not members of the committee may also speak in their role as a community advocate. And I don't believe we have any councillors in that role here this evening. So members, may I remind you, any request for an amendment, deferral or refusal must make it clear the material planning consideration for the minutes. So we will now discuss 5A 23/1123/FUL, land north of Watford Road and west of High Street, Elstree, Hertfordshire. And I'll invite our legal services to explain the application and our decision making this evening before we hear the application. Thank you.
Thank you. So this application has come back to Planning Committee on the grounds that there has been changes to the National Planning Policy Framework and the PPG. So the report is presented in addition to the previous one that members have already decided, and we're not looking at those grounds as were determined under the first time it went to committee. We're purely looking at the updated provisions and the weighting, which does have a bearing because it's greenbelt. So it's crucial that it comes back to Planning Committee for determination on those grounds as presented in the report today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So may I ask now the officer to present the application? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to refresh your memory, so I've set out the application description of development here. So it proposes and it's an application for extra care residential development falling within use class C2 with community facilities, associated access from Watford Road, parking, landscaping, public open space and other associated work. Extra care developments are also known as integrated retirement communities, which is set out in the original committee report. The purpose-built or adapted flats or bungalows with a medium to high level of care available if required through an on-site care agency. Essentially allows for residents to live independently with 24-hour access to support services and staff. Other things like meals are also available to them. There are extensive communal areas such as space to socialise or a wellbeing centre. And the intention is for residents to benefit from varying levels of care as time progresses. So there a total of 141 units are proposed by this application, 24 of which are one-bed flats, 109 of which are two-bed flats and 8 two-bed bungalows. Just to remind you, it's an application for full planning permission, so it's not made an outline. And the site is allocated in the Regulation 18 draft local plan for approximately 140 extra care units, but given the early stage of that local plan, only limited weight could be given to it. So just to provide you a little bit of background and update why this application is back with you. So this application was presented to committee in July 2024 with a recommendation to grant permission. There was a resolution to grant permission subject to deferral to the Secretary of State and completion of the Section 106 agreement. The Secretary of State declined to call in the application, leaving only the Section 106 to complete. Whilst that legal agreement is now ready to complete, it's taken several months, largely due to reasons outside of the applicant's control. And during that time, there have been changes to national policy and guidance, as Kavinder explained. So on that note, so Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act states that planning applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The MPPF is one such material consideration, as is the PPG, both of which were updated in December. As such, the application should be considered by the committee in light of this updated policy, focusing on the key areas of change since the previous resolution to grant permission. Officers have received council advice today and have been advised that this approach is sound and legally correct. So again, just to refresh your memory, so here are the Section 106 heads of terms which were set out in the original committee report and which are now drafted into a Section 106 agreement ready for completion. So it includes a £1 million contribution towards affordable housing, things like barrel bike contributions and money towards NHS. So I'll just give you a very brief summary of the site again. So you can see the site outlined in red here. So you've got Watford Road to the south, you've got the crossroads with the High Street. You've got land owned by Oldham Estate to the north, the small estate of Land's End to the west of the site. You've got a small pocket of TPO woodland within the site, which is to be retained. And you've got the sort of wider Elstree conservation area here. So there's some photos to remind you. So photo A looking southeast up Watford Road, the site on the left-hand side of the image. B, again looking southeast, more towards the corner of the crossroads. And then C, looking west down Watford Road. See the site is on the right here. Some more photos. So A, looking north in towards the site. B, again looking northwest at the site. C, further down Watford Road, looking northeast at the site. These images are taken sort of to the northeast of the site, so you've got an image from the Watling Court car park, so the site's on the other side of those trees, you can see to the sort of front and left of the image. And then B, looking back at Watling Court, just to show you some of the context. And then A and B are looking from that land to the north of the site towards the site, and C looking east up towards Watford Road. So this is the site plan, which you would have seen in the original presentation. So again, the predominance of greenery you can see on the plan here. It's landscape led, so that landscape approach was very much intertwined into the design of this scheme. You've got the promenade, walkway close to the village core, with community facilities, and to act as a sort of extension to that high street area. And there'll be community uses at the ground floor area here. And then you've got the smaller bungalows towards the northern part of the site, where there's slightly more sensitive landscape views. Finally, just to show you the CGIs of the development, just to remind you of that. So this top one is looking north with Watford Road behind the camera. So this would be that promenade area with the community facilities at ground floor level. This image here looking west within the village green with the central oak tree within the foreground. Finally, the cottages at the northern part of the site. And then this image here taken from Watford Road looking at the Nuttery Orchard Garden area. So moving on to this, here I've set out the key benefits of the scheme as were set out in the original committee report. So just to summarise, so the key benefits are addressing the need for specialist housing for older people in the borough, the contribution the scheme makes towards the council's housing land supply, which also includes freeing up larger family housing within the borough, the various economic and social benefits of the scheme, the lack of availability of alternative sites for this type of development, the health and wellbeing benefits, and the biodiversity net gain of 57%. Previously, the committee agreed with officers that the benefits clearly outweigh the harm occurring, such that very special circumstances existed to grant permission. So I'm just going to talk you through some of these key policy updates as set out in the addendum report. So firstly, there's the introduction of the golden rules, which the NPPF advises should be complied with for major housing schemes in the Greenbelt. Essentially, it sets out 3 requirements for major housing schemes. Requirement A is an uplifted affordable housing requirement. Currently, because we don't have a local plan which has been produced following this NPPF update, the requirement is for that to be 15% above the usual policy requirement. So that means that in this case, the policy requirement based on the golden rules would be a 50% affordable housing requirement. Part B requires necessary improvements to local or national infrastructure. So those are improvements considered to be necessary for that development. So contributions towards healthcare or any sort of off-site junction improvements, for example. And requirement C is the provision of new or improved green spaces that are accessible to the public. Going back to Part A, so the PPG currently advises that for Greenbelt development, viability cannot be considered currently when considering the golden rules. So, but it does also make clear that the government is reviewing this position, and they intend to change that guidance to account for certain circumstances where viability should be taken into account. The NPPF advises that schemes that comply with the Golden Rule should be given significant weight in favour of the scheme, but it doesn't advise whether there are any consequences of non-compliance with the rules, either in full or in part. So in this case, a viability assessment was previously submitted, which found the scheme not to be viable even in a 100% market scenario. A commercial decision was made by the applicant to provide a £1 million contribution regardless of this, and that was accepted by the council and is now set out within the draft Section 106 agreement. Consequently, the applicant is now in a position where they do comply with requirements B and C of the Golden Rules, but are unable to comply with Part A because of the viability issues. It should be noted that the Golden Rule requirement do not distinguish between general needs and specialist housing such as this, and it's considered by officers that the current wording of the PPG could potentially prohibit this specialist form of development within the Greenbelt, given that it's often challenging to deliver policy compliant affordable housing, let alone an uplifted requirement of 50%. It's also worth noting that the core strategy, so policy CS4, does allow the submission of viability assessments, so there is currently some conflict between our own local policies and the national policy in the NPPF. So another concept introduced by the updated NPPF is the grey belt. This is defined as land in the green belt comprising previously developed land or any other land which doesn't strongly contribute towards purposes A, B and D in paragraph 143. So in this case, the site is considered to be grey belt as it doesn't contribute strongly towards any of these purposes, as was set out in the original committee report. So paragraph 155 of the NPPF advises that development should not be regarded as inappropriate development within the green belt, where the development would utilise grey belt land and would not fundamentally undermine the purposes taken together of the remaining green belt across the area of the plan. There is a demonstrable need for this type of development. The development would be in a sustainable location, with particular reference to paragraphs 110 and 115 of the NPPF. And where applicable, the development proposed would meet the Golden Rules set out in paragraphs 156 and 157. So officers consider that the scheme does comply with A, B and C, but only partially complies with Part D, given that the Golden Rules aren't complied with in full. As such, even though the site is considered to be grey belt, it still needs to be considered inappropriate development within the green belt because it hasn't fully complied with these requirements. So finally, the updated policy and guidance also updated the way in which local housing needs are considered. So the update to the standard method for calculating housing need. As a result of that, Hertsmere's housing need figure has increased by about 41%, so from about 731 homes per year to 1,034 homes, so quite a significant increase. As well as that, the latest housing delivery test results were published in December, which shows that Hertsmere's housing delivery has dropped to 46% of the calculated need. As a consequence of this, a 20% buffer now needs to be applied to our housing need levels, which increases it even further. It should also be noted that that housing delivery test was based on the lower need figure, so given there's now been a 40% uplift, it will be even more challenging to meet that requirement in the future. As such, it's clear that since the application was last presented to the committee, the level of housing need has increased, but the recorded housing delivery has decreased. So the result of that is that the scheme's contribution towards housing land supply now makes an even greater impact than it did when it was first presented to you. So I've reset out the planning balance here, as was shown in the original presentation, but I've added and amended it slightly to account for this new policy and guidance. So you can see where I've highlighted in yellow the changes. So conflict with the Golden Rules, we've given moderate weight, partially owing to the fact that the scheme would provide a specialist form of housing where viability is a significant constraint, but also because the scheme would still comply with the rules in part, as I mentioned, so complying with parts B and C of the Golden Rules. On the other side, officers have increased the weight given to the contribution that the scheme makes towards local housing supply, given that there is now an increased level of need and reduced level of delivery in the borough since July last year. All of the other weightings are consistent with the previous report. So in summary, the development would result in harm to the green belt, which must be given substantial weight in the planning balance. There would also be a low to mid-level of less than substantial harm to the setting of several heritage assets, which is given moderate to significant weight. The harm to the landscape is given limited weight, and now conflict with the golden rules is given additional moderate weight. Despite the harms occurring in this case, measures have been taken through high quality and landscape-led design to reduce the harm whilst making effective use of the site. Officers considered that the scheme would integrate well with the village and would complement and enhance the existing facilities and services at the heart of the village. There are several key benefits of the scheme as set out previously, with the most notable being the delivery of specialist housing for the elderly within an area of need. The benefits of this cannot be understated, given the level of need locally and nationally. Not only will this contribute towards local housing supply, but it will also free up existing family housing within the borough, helping to meet wider needs for housing. This need has increased significantly since the application was last presented, so the contribution made by the scheme is now even greater, as I mentioned. Overall, when considered collectively, the benefits of the scheme are considered to be very substantial and would clearly outweigh the harm that has been identified in this instance. As such, officers do not consider that the updates to the MPPF or PPG change the officer's recommendation to this committee, and our view remains that there are very special circumstances that would justify the grant of permission in this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions before we invite the members of the public? No. Please, can I call Mr. Michael Horlitz to speak against the application? Thank you, sir. You'll have 3 minutes if you press the button to start. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Horwitz, and I've never done this before, so apologise for being slightly nervous. There is no affordable housing element to this application, and therefore that presents a conflict to golden rules. It's my opinion that the overdevelopment proposed is ugly and detrimental to the area. One of my principal concerns relates to highway safety, with only one access to the site, and this will cause a dangerous backlog to traffic and congestion. Having regard to what's been said this evening, I'm not sure whether that's even being considered at this time, but traffic is back down to Centennial Park, Watford Way, Barnet Road and Allam Lane, and the dangerous crossroads cannot sustain more vehicular traffic. This is damaging to the environment and a strain on local facilities, notwithstanding the extra money that's clearly been sent to Shopwick. There is a loss of light and overshadowing. There's a loss of trees. We have TPOs for a reason, and it's sad that it's not being regarded to. The real problem I have with this, being a neighbour, is the water table, and my greatest concern is that it is already at very high, and this development will cause flooding to the Land's End houses and gardens. This is already in evidence, and Thames Water regularly attend because of the flooding. I would request that any planning approval should be considered, but to ensure there is a covenant on the developers and the owners in the future that they are responsible for damage caused by this development by water into the neighbouring properties and gardens. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I've never done it before, and I can see I've raced ahead. There is little point in me. I'm not going to waste it. I've got a minute to go. So there's no point in me raising arguments of parking, traffic, etc., because that's already been discussed previously. So I've had to learn very quickly in the moments of your summation previously about what's being approved and what isn't and why. I would ask you to seriously look at the ability of the council to put a caveat in for responsibility. They've made promises that they're not going to flood our houses, and I understand that. Well, if they are going to, I think there's no reason why the council shouldn't be able to put a caveat to stop that. aside from that, development can't be stopped. Thank you for your time. I know I've been a little quicker than I thought I was going to be, but whatever you decide.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Please can I call Mr. Guy Flintoff to speak for the application? You will have 3 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Guy Flintoff, UK Head of Later Living at Stantec and Planning Consultant for the project. As members will recall, the application team worked extensively with your officers, the design panel and other stakeholders over an extensive pre-application period and following the submission of the planning application to bring forward a scheme that was praised for its best practiced approach to design, placemaking, community and the environment. The site's the only one in the Council's draft local plan proposed to be allocated for specialist housing with care for older people. The proposals would help meet that pressing need. It would make facilities and amenities, including open space, available to the wider community. It would help reinvigorate Elstree, bringing custom to local businesses. The Section 106 agreement, which enshrines many of these features of the scheme for the benefit of the community, has been in an agreed form for some time, whilst we'll be continuing our work with local stakeholders. The agreement has been signed and sealed by the parties, ready to be executed, so that consent can be issued to enable pre-commencement technical and design work to get underway. The revised MPPF seeks to ensure that local housing needs are more fully met. It introduces a more permissive approach to development in the Greenbelt. When the committee considered the application in July, it agreed that very special circumstances in support of the proposals significantly outweighed the harm to the Greenbelt. Those circumstances are only heightened by the increased housing targets. The proposals comply with the golden rules as far as is possible, including contributing £1 million towards the provision of affordable housing, providing the necessary infrastructure and providing open space accessible to the community. The planning balance in favour of the proposals therefore remains largely unchanged. I'm sure your officers will pick up on issues. There are 2 accesses within the design and details of drainage, including better controlling water on the site, were dealt with through the planning application process. So we commend your officer's report for its succinct assessment and urge you to support these proposals, much needed in the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Officers, do you have any comments before I ask members? No. Members, do you have any questions for officers? Councillor Morris.
Thank you. It's a slightly confusing application, and we're already aware of the confusion as to why we're considering it. But of course, the landscape of this type of development in this locality, and I'm talking about this immediate locality, has changed significantly since we first approved the original application. And I'd like some guidance from officers, because one of the points that you made in the presentation was that there is no other available land within the immediate locality to do something of a similar nature. Yet we now see that there are 2 other applications, I believe, in planning. One is of which is Heathbourne Green, the other is Caldecott Farm, for schemes that could be considered to be not dissimilar, which for me changes the landscape as to how we may or may not consider this. Now, of course, there is the argument that they have not yet been considered, but it is actually throwing a cat amongst the pigeons, trying to understand how, when we say that there aren't other sites available, yet there are 2 others currently being considered. I wonder if we could have some clarity on that, please.
Thank you.
So essentially, are you saying because there are other applications around for this form of development, you believe there to be available alternative sites?
Well, we're being told, sorry, you said in your presentation that there was no other available sites in the locality for this type of scheme, and yet there are 2 others that I believe are currently in planning already, being considered. And I know we only consider the one that is in front of us at this particular time, yet as part of the presentation we also know that there are two other schemes coming forward, and I'd just like some explanation as to the confusion that is being created by saying there is nothing available, yet there are two current schemes being presented to officers.
So the application was accompanied by an alternative site assessment, which essentially looked at starting at the land that was sort of brought forward as part of the council's evidence base in terms of our local plan evidence base, and looking at the sites listed in that, and it looked through sort of the availability of sites for this form of development and the suitability of them for this form of development, and based on that sort of sequential assessment, there was only one other site that was sort of available and preferable to this one. However, that site alone wouldn't have met the need in full. So essentially, we were able to give this scheme some weight because of that.
I'm sorry to pick you up on that, and I'm sorry to challenge you, but there is no local plan, so I'm not sure that that is relevant. We can only look at what is presented to us in front of us at this time, and we do know, officers can confirm, that there are two other sites in the locality, very close locality to this site, that are offering schemes of a not dissimilar nature. And I just want some clarity on why we're being told that there is nothing else available, and yet there are two other sites very nearby. And my concern is that we don't end up creating over-provision now of this type of facility.
We need to just, I will defer to the officers, but we do need to remember that we are looking at this existing application and only the changes to the MPPF and other associated documentation, rather than what might come later and might not come later, if you see what I mean.
I'm sorry to correct you on that. It makes the point that there was no other available sites in the locality, and we know that there are. That's all I'm asking.
Fair enough. Josh? Yes. Thank you.
So essentially, the alternative site assessment, it was based on our draft local plan evidence base, which, as you know, has, a call for sites where landowners submit sites which are available for development, etc. So it gone through that information there to identify sites. Those that are currently sort of applications, first of all, they are still pending consideration. So we can't really give those very much weight because they haven't been considered by officers or the committee at this stage. But secondly, the alternative site assessment had to look at what sites were available at the time and what were open to the applicant to actually deliver this form of development on. So the fact that they've been brought forward by someone else sort of in that interim period, we can't take account of.
Councillor Sussman. We'll get to you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I do have quite a few points, so I think it's better just do it in one go rather than keep coming back. Actually, I wasn't going to start with, but it came to me when Councillor Morris was just saying about sites and sites not being available. There are a couple of other large schemes I think I've noticed in planning, which are Allam Lane for care units and also one on Barnet Lane. So I think what Councillor Morris was trying to say is that the applicant has suggested that there aren't other suitable sites, but I think just as an observation, it's clear that there are several other sites. It's just may not be a site that they own, but anyway, that's a different point. My other questions they relate to the new golden rules of the NPPF, and we're looking at this application here and now with sight and knowledge of those rules. Part A can't comply because of viability, because if I'm correct, should it be 40% shared ownership or affordable?
So the Part A requires a 15% uplift
Right.
above our policy requirement. So our policy requirement is 35%. So that uplift pushes it up to 50%.
Okay, and am I right that, how is my head going with this? Okay, am I right that there's going to be no social housing on this site proposed, and instead a £1 million contribution?
Yes, so no affordable housing delivered on the site. So it's a £1 million contribution. So as part of the original application, there was the viability assessment, which showed that even if they delivered 100% market units on this site, it would still be unviable. So that provision of £1 million was a commercial decision from the applicant.
Okay, so bear with me here, but the contribution should be, based on the site, 8.5 million, is that correct?
I don't have the exact figure to mind. However, the contribution, if you based it on a 50% affordable housing requirement, would be substantially more than is being provided.
Okay, so the papers say on page 7.187 on page 87, it says that the contribution would fall short, so the 1 million would fall short of the 8.5 million that would be required based on a development of 40%. So my maths tells me that that's about a 12% contribution of probably what it should be, which does seem woefully low. And I guess viability is a business thing. If something's not viable, then it's, as a business person, I would think not do it, but it's either viable or it's not. And I feel that to not be viable at the cost of what is very needed affordable housing and you know, shared accommodation, that concerns me. And one last question. Well, I'd like to thank the first gentleman who spoke against it. I think he spoke very well. And I do get with that junction, because however many times they do roadworks there, we always expect it to work better, and it just seems to come back the same. But one other question, have the flood maps been updated as well since the new MPPF? Because I think that's always a concern for that site. Thank you.
So the Environment Agency are actually in the process of updating their flood maps at the moment, but from my understanding, it wouldn't have a material change to the level of flood risk on this site. So what was the other question?
The other one was just clarifying the percentage offered in lieu of the lack of social housing, shared housing, etc. So
circling back to that point, so you are correct that the £1 million would be a lot less than if they were to deliver a policy compliant level of affordable housing. But I suppose all I would say on that point is that was accepted last time this was taken to committee, and there are reasons in this case why they can't provide a viable application, essentially.
But we've been told to look at this as a new application, which is exactly what I'm doing.
No, sorry, Councillor Sussman, don't mean to interrupt. We're being asked to look at this application with the new eyes glasses that the MPPF gives us, which does not mention affordability. So if the applicant offered a certain amount last time and that was accepted, it's not actually relevant. I'm sorry, I will defer maybe to my legal, but it's not something we can use as a reason not to accept it this time. I defer to my legal colleague to maybe put it a bit better.
Thank you. Those issues regarding the contribution, the viability and the road works, I think all issues to do with roads were dealt with in the original application. So members did discuss it there. This committee will only be looking at the report as presented with the changes to the MPPF and the PPG as set out in the beginning part of the report, and they're the only reasons that members are making a decision on.
Can I come back to you? Because I've got other people who've been waiting. Sorry, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Briefly, I think Councillor Morris asked a good question, because the lack of available sites is part of the planning balance as presented, so it is a pertinent question. More broadly, this in a sense for us is a test case, because it's our first such determination under the new NPPF. And when rules are changed, in the same way that when there's a new law, that law becomes real when it's tested in the courts. In the same way with this NPPF, it's tested and made real when it comes to planning committees such as ours. So it is quite important and significant in as much as this is the first time we are being asked to apply this new policy to a specific application. So it's quite a bit to think about. And as presented in the framing, the golden rules are given quite some significance. So I feel as if we should consider how this application matches up to those golden rules. Josh, could you go to your slide where you show how this complies on the 3 golden rules?
So yeah, this is the slide on the golden rules.
There was one.
Was it
the next one where you demonstrate how it matches, how it complies with or not the 3 golden rules?
So this slide is slightly differently. It's different.
No, it was before then, I think.
Before that one.
In your report, you consider that it doesn't comply with Rule A, but it does comply with Rules B and C. Could you go back to that part and just run through us again how it complies in terms of provision of green space or infrastructure? In other words, could you expand on the detail from which you consider that it does comply with 2 of the golden rules? Does that make sense now?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's fine. So as you know, so Part A of the golden rules is the uplifted affordable housing requirement. As we've discussed, it wouldn't comply with that requirement. Part B, so that's necessary improvements to local or national infrastructure. This is an interesting one because you would expect any development to achieve necessary improvements to infrastructure, given that they are considered to be necessary. So in this case, that would include things like the NHS contribution, for example. So a contribution was considered to be necessary to ensure that the NHS, local GPs and whatnot have sufficient capacity for this. So it has done that. So it has complied. And then Part C, so the provision of new or improved green spaces that are accessible to the public. So this scheme does include open space that will be accessible to the public. It's got, green within the centre. It's got woodland walks and that sort of thing. It's all, landscape led, as I've explained. So it does comply with Parts B and C, but it cannot comply with Part A because of the viability issues.
So the S106 money for the NHS counts as infrastructure. For the public green space, how big is it? Because quite a lot hangs on definition here.
I don't have a exact amount to hand. I could have a look in the original committee report. I mean, the MPPF doesn't actually set out a sort of a quantum that is required of open space. It sets out the provision of new or improved green spaces that are accessible to the public. Looking at the scheme and the landscape-led approach that's been taken, the open space that's provided within the site, I would say that, and also the site is not currently publicly accessible, so it would open up the site to the public. I don't think we would be able to conclude that they haven't complied with that requirement.
Okay, thank you. What I'm getting at is if the golden rules are important, we need to scrutinise how it complies with or not those golden rules.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously a little puzzled as to why we're dealing with this, but I thought we dealt with that earlier on today. Look, we seem to be rehashing a lot of the old arguments that came that we discussed when we brought this to committee originally. We looked at the affordability of the housing in this development, and we kind of accepted that because of the specialist need of kind of age-restricted homes and the build costs associated with those, that the £1 million kind of provision for off-site affordable homes was acceptable to us. It was acceptable to 10 of the 11 committee members that actually made the decision on that previous application. I disagree with my colleagues about other sites in the borough. Yes, there's lots of flour and eggs out there, but nobody's granted them permission to bake the cake yet. The only time that will become applicable is when those applications come in, and if we pass this again tonight, we will then measure the fact that there's already 141 units being built. That will affect their application, not this one. We can't be speculating what may be coming down the line as a reason to determine this application. Nothing has changed for myself on this one. Whether we're having the discussions about grey belt, green belt, brown belt, pink belt, it doesn't really matter. We all gave permission to build in the green belt. We were happy that the tests were met for very special circumstances to develop this site in the green belt, and voted for it appropriately. So at the opportune time, Madam Chair, I'd like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation and pass this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Councillor Giorgio.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I'd also like to ask a little bit about how the conflict with the golden rules in section 6.4 on page 19 we discussed about kind of like, the letter of the law when it comes to this MPPF changes, and while I appreciate that we may not be meeting necessarily section A of the golden rules, I think also as a planning committee we kind of also have to consider the kind of spirit of the new rules, and in the benefits section it mentions around the contribution towards 5-year housing land supply, freeing up larger family housing within the borough. Some of the reasons for these new rules is because there is a housing crisis, and that's affecting both at the level of people that are trying to get on the housing ladder, but also at the level of people who are looking to downsize or retire and are struggling to find suitable properties. I think, in our borough, I think, every month for somebody to be in a nursing home or something like that, you're looking at around between £5,000 and £6,000 per month. And, people are going to run through inheritances very quickly at that rate if there isn't a suitable sites built in our borough to house people who are retiring or who are in need of this kind of care in our borough. And so I think that should, and I'm glad to see that it's been given very substantial weight afforded in the benefits, because I think that's really important for the health and wealth of our borough, that people are protected in later life in that way. So I also would move to approve this once it comes to the decision, and I think that some of my fellow councillors should also really consider that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Rosehill. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a very quick question. It's Part A, I'm correct, that's not compliant. Why is it not compliant if Part A requires 15% above policy requirement? If we're 35%, add 15, and in this case it's 50, so would it not be compliant?
So just to clarify, so the policy requirement in this location is 35%. The golden rules then uplifts that through Part A to 50%. This application doesn't include affordable housing on site, so it doesn't comply with that. It's, I suppose, 0%, but they are providing a £1 million contribution. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Josh. It was only because it was 50% in this case, so that's just why I got confused.
Thank you. Oh yes, Councillor Sisman, pardon me.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go back over old ground because it just seems fruitless, but I would like to say, Councillor Georgie, I agree with you 100%. We do need more housing, and I get that, and at all ends of the sort of ladder. However, for me, that's why I feel that the contribution of only £1 million towards what should be £8 million, which I understand why that isn't viable, but I just think that we need more than that contribution of £1 million to actually help us to help build more housing, social housing, for those that are really struggling at the moment to get on the ladder. And that's why this doesn't sit right with me, because I agree so much with what you say. Thank you.
Okay, so are we ready to vote? Thank you, Councillor Sussman. Yes, Councillor Gray.
Yeah, I put them, I said, well, at the opportune time, I would like to move
Lovely.
the motion.
Thank you very much.
Consider it moved.
Can I have someone second? Thank you.
So I just want to say, just to give members as much comfort as possible, this isn't just the case that the officers have made a recommendation to you. We've taken both internal and external legal advice through council, and they've advised that our approach to this matter is entirely sound, both in bringing it back to committee and indeed the way we've assessed it. So I just want to give members comfort on that. This isn't just purely an officer doing something very new and very fresh. We've actually taken an external opinion on it.
Thank you very much. So we're ready to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommendation is as set out in the report. So members are asked to vote. Councillor Allen?
Against.
Councillor Amron?
For.
Councillor Giorgio?
For.
Councillor Gray?
For.
Councillor Hodgson-Jones?
For.
Councillor Kazar?
For.
Councillor Morris?
Against.
Councillor Richards?
For.
Councillor Rosehill?
Against.
Councillor Sussman?
Against.
Councillor Green?
For.
That recommendation has been carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 6 of the agenda are planning appeals. Can everyone confirm they've received their list of current planning appeals and are happy to note? 7 is any other business that I consider urgent, and there is none. Item 8, dates for future meeting. The next date of planning committee will be held Thursday, 20th of March. Thank you very much, members of the public and officers and the committee, and I'll close the meeting at 19:02. Thank you.